All right, so in this video, I want to go over the pre-lab based on the learning objectives for Lab 5. So, objective number 1 is to be able to define blood pressure, and that's pretty much what we did in the lab, so based on systolic and diastolic pressures. And then describe the carotid cuff sounds, and as well as identify what the average blood pressure is, the mean arterial pressure. And these two down here are, they are screen grabs of your lab manual as well as the PowerPoint slides that are also uploaded together with this video. So blood pressure, we did this in the lab, so I'm not going to go over it. But what I want to go over here is the carotid cuff sounds. So now if you use a cuff to occlude, that is to completely block the blood vessel, and you placed a stethoscope on the antecubital vessel right there in your elbow, you will not hear anything. You will not hear the pulsating of the artery that comes from the systole and diastole of the heart. That is the contraction and the relaxation of the heart. And so for that reason, you know that pressure in the cuff exceeds the pressure in that vessel. So as you gradually release the pressure in that vessel and you monitor the blood pressure on the gauge, the pressure reads on the gauge, you will come to a point where for the first time you hear a muffled sound in that antecubital blood vessel. And so at that point, you say that, oh, I have just exceeded, I've just gone below the systolic pressure. Okay, the pressure in the cuff has just gone below the systolic pressure. So you hear that first sound there. And then as you keep releasing the pressure, eventually you get to a point where you no longer can hear anything. And that point corresponds with the diastolic pressure. So when you measure that, together, that gives you a systolic and diastolic pressure. We did this in the lab. So, question just for you to think about. What are the steps for taking the blood pressure? So just refer back to the lab manual and ask what are the steps that you have to take to measure blood pressure using a cuff. What causes the carotid cuff sounds? The simple answer indeed is turbulent flow, because when the blood is flowing without any pressure on the artery, you will not hear a sound. It's smooth. But the moment it's occluded and the blood flow is rushing through in a turbulent fashion, that causes the sounds. And when those sounds disappear, you say, well, now you know the diastolic pressure. So again, the point at which the sounds are no longer heard, D with in red, is the diastolic pressure. So objective 2, define the pulse pressure, total PR, and so on. So I'm just going to go straight into it, okay? So your pulse pressure is the systolic minus the diastolic pressure. So just to note, what controls the pulse pressure really is the elasticity of your arteries. And as you can imagine, as we grow older, our arteries become less and less elastic. It becomes stiffer and stiffer. And so you have this thing where your pulse pressure actually increases as you grow way older. Second here is, so you have this example, someone's blood pressure, 145/93. What is this person's, first of all, is this person hypertensive? Yes, it exceeds 120/80, so the person certainly is hypertensive. And then so systolic pressure will be 145, the larger number. Diastolic is 93. The pulse pressure would be 145 minus 93, which gives you 92. All right. Next is, what is the mean arterial pressure? So that's the pressure, average arterial pressure across the entire cardiac cycle. And we can't just take the average of the systolic and the diastolic. We take the diastolic plus a third of the pulse pressure. And so another way to calculate the mean arterial pressure is to calculate the cardiac output and multiply that by the total peripheral resistance. I will talk about what that is later. So again, back to that example we just did. Systolic pressure 145, diastolic pressure 93, pulse pressure is 52. And so what is the mean arterial pressure? Oh, first of all, you have to divide the pulse pressure by 3. So 52 divided by 3 is 17.3, and you add that to the diastolic, the lower of the two pressures in the blood pressure. 93 plus 17 gives you a pulse pressure, a mean arterial pressure of 110 millimeters of mercury. I did not put the units here, but I do require that you put the units, okay? All right, so the other way to calculate the mean arterial pressure is to calculate the cardiac output and multiply that by the total peripheral resistance. So what is the cardiac output? So to calculate that, the cardiac output really is the amount of blood, total volume of blood pumped out of the heart in 1 minute. So to do that, you need to know how much is pumped out in one beat, and that is called the stroke volume, typically somewhere between 40 to 70 milliliters. So, and remember I said this, that garbage in, garbage out. Whatever comes in is whatever comes out. So it means that your stroke volume, if you are healthy, is equivalent to the amount of blood that returned to the ventricle in that cycle. Okay, that returned to the atrium and atrium to the ventricle. So it's garbage in, garbage out. Whatever comes in is what goes out. So 50 came in, 50 goes out. And so cardiac output is heart rate in beats per minute times stroke volume. And so let's look at an example here. And here, this is an example. So this person has a heart rate of 70 beats per minute, stroke volume of 50 mils per beat. What is the cardiac output? Pretty straightforward. Heart rate times stroke volume gives you the value. It's 3,500 mils. So what is the mean arterial pressure? Mean arterial pressure is cardiac output multiplied by the total peripheral resistance. And that value is, in this example to the left, in the red box, is 0.027 millimeters of mercury per mil of blood per minute. And if you multiply that, you get the number, okay, of the mean arterial pressure. So what are the factors that determine this thing called the TPR? So the TPR, okay, really measures the resistance in the blood. And remember, your arterial side is the part that holds the resistance. So essentially, it is, you see why you calculate the mean arterial pressure with an equation that includes the resistance in the blood vessels, okay? So that's the unit. It is governed primarily by the lumen size, how wide your blood vessel is, the diameter. So a blood vessel could be vasoconstricted. I showed that in blue. In blue because it's smaller, the diameter is way smaller, and then it is dilated, vasodilation, when it is a lot larger. So, and I put that in red because a blood, if you think about the color of your skin on your face, for example, when the color of your skin is kind of really pinkish or it shows a lot of blood flow in it, typically that's because your blood vessels are dilated. There's more blood vessels per unit area of the skin of the face that it appears red. So that's why I kind of colored this in red, okay? All right. So it's, again, please note, this is not oxygenated or deoxygenated blood. We're just talking the diameter of the blood vessels, okay? Please don't confuse that, because arteries always carry blood, oxygenated blood. So what can make a blood vessel dilate? Usually the primary control for the diameter of your blood vessels is epinephrine or norepinephrine. When there's no norepinephrine, so when you're at rest, your blood vessels are dilated on the right. But whenever you perceive danger or you are exercising or anything that demands that raises your blood pressure, that would increase epinephrine release, and that will cause the blood vessel, as you can see on the left, to become vasoconstricted, a lot smaller. So the question is, so what happens to the diameter in vasoconstriction? Of course, we know that it's going to decrease in vasoconstriction, and it's going to increase in vasodilation. What does that do? How does that change pressure? The exact opposite. In vasoconstricted blood vessels, the blood pressure increases by a magnitude of about 4 orders. Okay, that's to the 4th order. Okay, not multiplied by 4. It's to the 4th order. And when it's vasodilated, the blood pressure decreases significantly. How about blood flow? Blood flow will, as you can imagine, follow diameter. The wider the blood vessel is, the wider the blood that flows through it. Why? There's less resistance, so more blood can flow through it. And as well, the diameter is wider, it can take in more blood. All right, objectives 6 to 10. First thing here is, let's talk about the baroreceptors on any, where it is on an image. So the baroreceptors, I'm going to talk largely about 2 of them, one in the carotid sinus right here, up here, and the other one right here in the aortic arch. And what do these things do? They sense the pressure in those 2 vessels, and when the pressure, for example, they kind of give feedback to the cardiovascular control center in your medulla right here. Now, if they sense the blood pressure is low, well, the way to increase pressure, we just saw in the last slide, is release epinephrine, and that's going to constrict the blood vessel, and that's going to increase the blood pressure. But the baroreceptors don't do that themselves. It uses a reflex. So, like any reflex, you serve nerve impulses to the medulla. And how does the medulla know, oh, it's an increase or it's a decrease? That's an interesting question, because nerves, a nerve will carry the same message. It's all electrical activity. But how does it know that, oh, it's an increase or it's a decrease? When the rate of firing of the receptors, the pressure receptors in that aortic arch, when the rate of firing is high, that happens when the blood pressure inside it is high. And so when this guy gets the message in the cardiovascular center, getting more impulses per second, it says, oh, blood pressure is high. To decrease that, it's going to output through the vagus nerve, this orange nerve, to release acetylcholine. And acetylcholine will cause the SA node, the rate of the SA node to decrease. And when the rate of the SA node decreases, the rate at which the blood pumps, the heart pumps blood, decreases. What does that mean? If heart rate decreases and blood pressure, mean arterial pressure, is equal to cardiac output multiplied by the total peripheral resistance, and cardiac output depends on the heart rate and the stroke volume. The important thing here to note is if the heart rate goes down, cardiac output goes down, as well the blood pressure will go down. So that's the reflex arc right there. So increased rate of firing, the medulla gets the message and says that means the blood pressure is high, I need to decrease it. To decrease it, it sends acetylcholine through the vagus nerve that causes the heart, the SA node, to decrease the rate of firing. And if the rate of the firing of the SA node decreases, the heart rate decreases. And that leads to a decreased blood pressure. And that shuts up the baroreceptors in the aortic arch. Okay. The converse will happen when, or the opposite will happen when the blood pressure in the aortic arch is low, whether you lost blood volume or whatever. or you just stood up from standing up, from lying down, and there's less blood delivered into the aortic arch, what does that cause? Well, now there's going to be less firing. And when there's less firing, the message gets to the cardiovascular center. And in response to that, the cardiovascular center says, oh, blood pressure is low. Let me increase blood pressure. And it does that by releasing epinephrine. And epinephrine, when it's released, goes to a lot more places than the acetylcholine we talked about before. First, it goes to the blood vessels, right? And it constricts them. That raises blood pressure, including the aorta, right? So it does that in the blood vessel. It goes to the SA node as well as the AV node and does the opposite of what acetylcholine does. That is, it raises the rate of firing of the SA node. That increases heart rate. And then the third place it goes is it goes to the cardiac muscle and causes the cardiac muscle to pump stronger, okay? Which would increase stroke volume, which will increase back the pressure in the aorta, okay? That was long-winded, okay? But we're almost done. Now, there's a scenario. This is Winnie. Winnie is lying down and got up, okay? Now, when you're lying down, gravity is not working against your venous system. Okay, so there's good perfusion to your legs, to your guts, to your head. You have good perfusion. But all of a sudden, when you stand up, blood pools on the legs, particularly if you just stand up and did nothing. Blood pools in the legs. Well, if blood pools in the legs, there's going to be less blood returning to the heart, less venous return. If venous return decreases, ultimately cardiac output will decrease. The stroke volume will decrease, even if it is momentary. Okay? And so, when the blood pools in the periphery, what will happen is, first, of course, it decreases venous return and causes decrease in stroke volume, which the baroreceptors in the aorta would detect, and they would try to remedy that. And to do that, they would slightly, very slightly, increase mean arterial pressure. Secondly, they will increase heart rate. Those are all adrenergic responses because of the reflex, baroreceptor reflex. So I'm just talking. So this here is just talking about a couple of things about the venous return. Usually, it's the skeletal muscles in the legs that really help move the blood against gravity, and the veins have valves. Arteries do not have valves. Okay, so that the valves prevent the blood from pulling back down under gravity. But and so one other thing that causes the venous return, that enhances the venous return, is the negative intrathoracic pressure. So when we breathe in, so notice that the thoracic chamber is a lot smaller when you is a lot bigger, when you breathe in. Because of it gets bigger when you're breathing in, there's going to be more negative pressure in the thorax, and that kind of helps. It decreases the resistance to the venous return, okay? And also slightly there's some compression on the venous return, and so that enhances venous return. That's another thing that helps to bring back veins to the blood, to the heart. Okay, some other things that can actually block venous, decrease venous return. And this happens a lot to elderly people when you're trying to do something called cosmal breathing, where you hold your breath, close your glottis, such that you can essentially lift something heavier. You know, that typical grunting sound that, the people who go to the gym a lot, when they're trying to lift something really, really heavy. When you close your glottis, and you're using the weight generated from that closed glottis and your biceps and all that, or whatever muscle you're moving, to enhance the generation of power, that raises the intrathoracic pressure, and it decreases the venous return, just as I just described here. So it's like forced expiration, and so venous return decreases. If you have some time, go watch this video and see how that may not always be a smart thing to do. Okay, and if you like, we can chat about that a little bit more. So barostal reflex, I have covered that already. I do not need to go over that anymore. And finally, I talked about this too, just so you can tie all of these things together. So if you think about this here, there's the systole and diastole. Notice here in the pressure in the ventricle rises remarkably as blood is filling. As blood fills and is being released. So that's the ventricular pressure. And then when the aortic valve closes, at that point you've expelled as much of the ventricle as you can. And so here, notice down here, the volume in the ventricles have come down to its basal level right here. Okay. And then at that point, the heart relaxes. And so you have a T wave, which is ventricular repolarization, right? And at that point as well, when the aortic valve closes, you hear the DUP sound. And then you can repeat the same thing and through the rest of the figure. Okay. Last objective here is the impact of the sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system on these cardiovascular variables. Just to clarify again, the sympathetic refers to the adrenergic division, and the parasympathetic refers to the cholinergic division. So the sympathetic is what we call the fight or flight, and the parasympathetic is the rest and digest. So what happens in the sympathetic? Everything just increases, pretty much. Heart rate increases. Epinephrine on the SA node, increase heart rate. Stroke volume increases. Well, the muscles are pumping stronger. Cardiac output would increase because cardiac output is heart rate times stroke volume. TPR would increase because epinephrine causes the arteries to constrict, which raises resistance. Ultimately, pulse pressure decreases. What happens with parasympathetic? Heart rate goes down. I'd like you to feel the rest. Okay. All right. Some other things that control blood pressure. It's not only epinephrine and acetylcholine. Local metabolic activity also changes blood pressure, and chemicals that are released into the blood from other sites. So, for example, when levels of oxygen is low and CO2 is building up in tissues, and that causes increased acidity, that causes vasodilation. So, which is one of the reasons why your skeletal muscles, the blood vessels in your skeletal muscles behave a little bit differently compared to the blood vessels like in your gut or on your skin. But that's beyond the lab for me to talk about. If you want to chat about it, please set up a time. I'll be glad to talk about that a little bit more. And that's that. Thank you so much, and good luck.